Thank you for sticking around in the afternoon. It's been a great conference so far. And my name is Michael Carisu. I'm an osteopathic family physician, and I'm also the director for the Center for Integrative Medicine at UC San Diego. And we're here to talk about this project I've started with several of my patients, and we got a little sampling of a few of the patients up here and about what we're trying to be doing for the future of healthcare. And, kind of going a little bit about the history of it, I'll give you that. But Project Apollo really is taking a deep dive at the data of each individual patient. And we're looking at the data at a very granular level of getting as much data as we can as possible and doing some shared decision making, and even more than that, just letting the patient be in the driver's seat of their own health. So this is kind of like the buzzwords of precision medicine that's out there. And I think everyone kind of has understood that. That's a big thing right now, but a lot of times that's being used in cancer genomics where it's working very well. And I want to take that model of precision medicine and apply it in the primary care type of aspect of things. But not only that, the thing I'm excited about is applying that to the integrative medicine realm of aspect of things, so we can start quantifying the journey to health of these individuals. And this kind of goes in line with the quantified self. Have you guys heard of the QS movement? So the QS symposium was down in San Diego, where we're all from. It was there last week and collaborating with a lot of people from there. And I'm looking at the quantified patient. And not only that, I want to see myself as the quantified doctor and tracking my own health data. And how does that doctor-patient relationship change over time? And getting a very granular look at someone, and it's just a snapshot. Like we go to the doctor, you take some blood tests, you might get an image. It's a snapshot in time. And what doctors don't do very well is they don't take longitudinal data on people. So I want to take multiple snapshots of my patients and track them longitudinally so we can look at this quantified journey and see if there's data analytics that can predict where there might be some health outcomes in all of this. And this all lends towards the N=1 type experiment. And that's a word that's kind of getting out there. We're collaborating with a few researchers who are well-versed in this, and they've done a lot of publications of N=1 type of things. And the power of N, you got a really great pharmaceutical study because they have N=10,000, N=100,000. Patients don't really care about that. They care about themselves. And as a physician, I want to see about that N=1 that's in front of me, and that's going to be a different N=1 at the very next patient, and seeing how we can, kind of prototype this moving forward. And, I always come to this quote by Albert Schweitzer, is that the doctor of the future will be oneself. And what does that really mean in today's digital age? This is from the Greek god Apollo of nothi satham, which means know thyself. But what does it mean to truly know thyself? Like, we know that some of the mystics, they go into these deep meditations to kind of know thyself. But can we quantify from a data perspective and know ourselves and have the data tell the story that we're going to be doing? Time magazine released an article a couple weeks ago about what happens when the patient becomes the boss. Right now you might be seeing some patients in your clinic. How many clinicians are out there that actually see patients? So a couple of you. And then the patient might say, oh, I Googled this information on myself. And then, kind of roll your eyes. You're like, oh gosh, I can't believe they just Googled all that information. Google's not that smart. But yet, right, Google's getting smarter. And artificial intelligence is going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting of this that we were trained to do as physicians. And there's going to be a huge tidal wave of data that's going to be coming that's patient-centered and patient-generated. And the average physician is not going to know what to do with that. The patient's not going to know what to do with that. So again, this is a model that I want to start trying to prototype to see where this can go in the future. Like what happens when the patient gets put in the driver's seat? What happens when the patient becomes the boss? And I've always thought about that as like, patients are always saying, hey, tell me what's wrong with me. And I'm like, I don't know, it's your body. You tell me what's wrong with me. And if that's not the case, then why don't we look at the data to see what's wrong with you? And this all came to a head, and this project really started when I met a very special patient of mine named Larry Smarr. If you don't know his name, just Google his name. He's one of the most quantified and digitized humans on the planet. For about 17 years, he's been tracking monthly biomarkers. Here's him standing in front of this 64 megapixel wall that he has. He works in the Department of California Institute of Technology in transcommunication at our university with the School of Engineering. He's from computational astrophysics, and he's taking all of that, and he's one of the major people who helped develop the first supercomputer to quantify what was going on with black holes and everything else. Very interesting person. Just, you know, Google this name and you'll learn a lot about one individual. And so since he became my patient, you know, I was like, what can we really do with this? And so he's standing in front of this wall. This is a time series of about 17 years of monthly biomarkers of data. And to his credit, you know, people are like, why are you really doing this? I think he's just curious, number one, but to his credit, if you can see, does this work with the laser? Maybe not. See the areas that are red? Those are blood biomarkers and stool biomarkers that are going in the abnormal range. And through his machine learning and everything that he's involved in, he was able to see trends in the data. Everything was pointing towards a diagnosis of Crohn's disease. He had his CRP was elevating at certain levels, his lactoferrin was elevating at certain levels. And so then he went to the doctors at the time, and this was several years ago, and he says, look, the data shows, and he correlated that with what he saw in his 23andMe genome and all of his microbiome samples that he's been doing. And he's like, look, I have Crohn's disease. And then they said, well, you don't have any symptoms, so come back when you have a symptom. And sure enough, about 6 to 9 months later, he had his first rectal bleed that led to another 4 to 6 months of getting a biopsy and ended up with Crohn's disease. And so he and I have been collaborating on a lot of different projects. The future patient is one of them. Is what does the patient of the future look like, besides just getting a very granular look of blood biomarkers, stool samples, and all of that. But now we have sensors everywhere, wearable devices. There's going to be sensors in your home. Alexa is going to be monitoring things. There's new chips that are in for AI that are going into all the cars, and there's going to be health monitors in your car before you even arrive at the doctor's office that data is going to be transmitted. And so this technology is coming whether we like it or not. And Larry and I have been doing some presentations on stage like this about what the doctor of the future, the patient of the future looks like. And then he tasked me about a year ago to try to scale this beyond himself and find other patients. And I was like, well, there's no really other patient like you, Larry, but I put the call out there and, you know, found some other patients of mine, and we're going to get to their stories in just a bit, who have been tracking their own data for various reasons from whatever health condition they have. And that's when I started thinking, I'm like, let's redesign. You know, we're talking about design thinking in a workshop earlier today, and Bangku's going to talk about that tomorrow. Let's try to redesign what the doctor-patient visit is going to be like, and redesign what the doctor-patient relationship is going to be like, and see if we can quantify that over a period of time. And what all of this really does is gives empowerment back to the patient, because sometimes they feel like they've bounced around the medical system. They start to become more engaged in their healthcare to make better healthcare decisions, and they become very educated about things. So using this example as 3 case examples, I'm going to now turn this over to a patient of mine named Dion, who's going to go into her story a little bit, and then we'll go down the row and then have time for questions at the end.
Thank you very much. So, like Mike said, my name is Dion Denmark. I'm actually trained as an MD and a PhD. And my story starts at about 2011 when I had just finished my program, the medical scientist training program at Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, Oregon. I was a pretty typical medical and graduate student in being extremely type A go-getter, doing everything to the extreme from, you know, being in school and all of the academic and research pursuits to all kinds of outdoor activities, running, hiking, mountain climbing, skiing, biking, yoga, you name it. This is a picture of my sweet dog, a 95-pound black lab who was all muscle and certainly required that level of activity. And so I was living a great life actually through medical and graduate school. I finished then and frankly was a bit, more than a bit burned out by my education and kind of what I recognized there's some pretty huge problems in the medical system that I don't have to tell anybody in this room about. So I did what my favorite thing was, which was traveling. I decided I was going to take some time off and try to recenter and figure out how I wanted to move forward with all of this education, considering the state of the system. So I took off internationally for 5 months, actually. This is a picture of me in New Zealand. I'm on a catamaran in the Bay of Islands in northern New Zealand, and this is exactly about the time I started to have some weird symptoms. They were fairly vague, nothing dramatic that put me out, but certainly something that just didn't feel quite right, particularly with my GI. I actually had a root canal 3 weeks before this in New Zealand for a tooth abscess. And I just actually one day spent the entire day in bed, and here I am in the middle of New Zealand. It's gorgeous, one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. And all I wanted to do was stay in my room. That was highly unusual, but I tried to just sleep it off and keep going. And I did over the next several months. I kept traveling, but things did not get better. They actually got decidedly worse. And when I returned, I was fairly bed-bound. I was barely getting up out of bed. I was extremely exhausted. I had no appetite, every GI symptom you can imagine, and a whole host of other strange symptoms, from the loss of night vision. I didn't feel safe to drive even when I was traveling, to weird urinary symptoms, a whole bunch of systemic things that went beyond the GI, but was something I had never experienced before. I had never not been able to will my body to do anything in my life, and all of a sudden now I wasn't able to. So the subsequent 2 years, 2012 to 2013, were spent on this diagnostic and treatment odyssey. Oops, so sorry, over here. This is what I imprecision precision medicine. So this is a list of all of the different types of clinicians that I saw. All the way on the left, you can see it's primary care, internal medicine, GI, rheumatology, urogynecology, the list goes on. Almost all of those have multiple times did I see some of those specialists. I was actually hospitalized for 3 days for severe hyponatremia, so that can be a life-threatening condition actually, and I was just steps away from the ICU for unknown reasons. Ended up going back to the emergency room for the same, some of the same issues, and still not resolved. Over in the middle there is a list of procedures that I had, again, many of those multiple times, so everything from colonoscopy to endoscopy to MRIs, and tons of imaging, all the way over to the right, which is a number of things that doesn't even come close to the things that I tried to help myself. I had actually have a lot of interest and conviction that other things besides traditional conventional Western medicine are useful, so I did all of those, of course. And none of those had made any real dent in my condition, except for a couple of times, a couple of different rounds of antibiotics actually made a huge difference, but that was short-lived for about 3 to 5 weeks at a time. And only on a handful of occasions. So this list at the bottom is a list of diagnoses that I carried, that I kind of say tongue-in-cheek, because this to me is not a diagnosis at all. This is a list of a whole bunch of symptoms. Clearly I'd had multiple infections. I ended up getting diagnosed with a severe neuromuscular motility disorder, which is a pretty debilitating condition because you cannot eat. And the list goes on here, a lot of which were involving the immune system and kind of complications of having had infections. So by 2014 and 15, I'd had enough, and I said, forget this, I have got to start applying the training that I had as an MD PhD, which just happened to be in systems approaches to complex disease. So my PhD was all about genetics and neuroscience, and I was using a number of different large data set generating technologies to understand complex neuropsychiatric disease. So this time during 2014 and 15 was now when some of these technologies were coming online. So that direct-to-consumer genetics, as well as microbiome, which was a word I did not learn in medical school and only started learning on this journey, these kinds of things were now available to me as a consumer. And unfortunately, even with all this training, I did not have access to any of this as a patient. I had to use my connections as a graduate student to get access to any of these kinds of technologies for my clinical care. But even if I did that, I had no doctor that I could go to with any of this data, which to me was shocking. And it was, in fact, Larry's talk in 2013 that I saw at TEDMed that really got me, actually brought me to tears at first because it was my story and it was shown in this huge screen and in all the beautiful data detail that I imagined we could use with patients but was not yet available. So in 2016, I finally found my way to a clinical care center, and it is still, to this day, the only one that I know exists, which is where, so it's called the Open Medicine Institute. It's actually right down the road from here. It's run by another MD PhD, Andy Kogelnick, who himself is a practicing clinician trained in infectious disease, but also has a PhD in computer science, which is an extremely rare combination and helps him think about data-driven medicine in a way that to this day nobody else does. So that's really our mission here, is to bring all these pieces together, work with emerging technology companies, work with, we have an internal software platform that the goal is to bring together all these different stakeholders around data, and particularly the patient, putting the patient in the driver's seat of their own data and getting them access to things that can help understand their condition. One of the things we do there to do this is integration. You hear that thrown around quite a lot, but we have some very specific ways that we use to do that. One of these is actually a very simple thing, but I still have yet to see this as a provider, which is a timeline view of what's going on with the patient. So in the top section there, you can see a snippet of some of my treatment from 2015 all the way up to 2018. All of those blue areas are different types of medications that I was on at any given time. And in the middle are some research data points. So at those times in orange are when global metabolomics data were collected. Those time points in green at the time are when microbiome, 16S microbiome sequencing was done on me. Actually now in 2018, those green points have increased to about, I think we're up to 75 now. So we're getting a really high resolution view on the microbiome data. At the bottom are some of the clinical events that were noted in my case, from symptoms all the way up to actual quote diagnoses, as in types of infection or other types of procedures that were done to determine whether a specific diagnosis was present. And so this is some of the data view that we've been getting on me now, finally, with being able to bring all of these pieces together. As you can see on the left, this is some of the microbiome sequencing that's happened actually over the very left data point is all the way back in 2015, and this goes all the way up into present day, and we use a whole bunch of really cool technologies. That this one on the right actually comes out of Stanford, so you may be familiar with the IASD topological data analysis software. This is lending tremendous view to these types of high resolution data set generating. Down at the bottom is some metabolomics work that our very strong partner in all of this is Metabolon out of Durham, North Carolina, and we're working, of course, with a lot of device data as well. This one from Whoop, looking at continuous HRV, and most importantly, to bring all of these different data sets together.
Dion?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I think I joined.
Oh yeah, it's on.
Okay, a little bit about me first. I was born in China, raised in Hong Kong, and I did my master's degree in genetics and my PhD in molecular biology at UCSD. And as a scientist, I'm a big fan of innovation and love to see new ideas and new technologies moving into everyday practice. What I want to start off is to tell you what it means to me to be an engaged patient. It means to me that one has to be engaged with oneself, engagement with life and family and friends. It's a desire for self-care and a commitment to do so. And one needs to pay attention and listen and trust and be able to take action and then make changes based on what you find out. and what I called mindful awareness. If we are aware and we reflect on our mind, we're given choices, and with that we could make change. And my what sparks me in my journey or passion for health and holistic healing started when I was 13, when I witnessed my uncle's miraculous recovery from a near fatal motorcycle accident. He collided at high speed with a truck and thrown off his motorcycle and then landed on one side of his body, completely fractured his entire leg and arms and severed nerves. And he was taken to the hospital, and then the doctor told him they have to amputate his arm and his leg. When he refused to have his arm and leg amputated, he was asked to leave the hospital, which he did. And obviously his doctor was not interested in listening to him or co-creating his health journey. After he left the hospital, he recruited another doctor who is a specialist in Chinese bone healing medicine. And to cut the story short, to this day, he didn't lose his arm or leg. And not only did he not walk with the limb, everything grew back. And later, he took up professional diving and was a PADI certified diving instructor and became the exclusive distributor for US Diver and Aqualung in Hong Kong. So this made a huge impression on me about, and sparked the desire for me to learn how the body works and how the body heals itself. And a few years later, when I was 16, I was sent to finish my last 3 years of boarding school in an English boarding school. And I had, excessive, uncontrolled weight gain, and which made me very miserable and reinforced my desire that I need to, learn and take charge of my own health journey. And that's how it started. And getting into my own health issues or my own health journey, I suffered from chronic insomnia and chronic constipation ever since I was quite young. And so I was sort of doing it on my own until, probably about 2 years ago, I I became a patient of Dr. Kurisu, and then one thing led to another. We found out, I got involved with the Project Apollo, and together with the guidance of Dr. Kurisu as my health partner, we came up with a plan for gathering the data, quantifying what my biomarkers look like, and then create an action plan and a monitoring plan. So here's my baseline assessment data, or baseline assessment that I'm in the process of gathering, getting the genomics, microbiome, and various imaging of brain and whole body MRI, and doing blood biomarkers, and basically metabolomics. And because I had insomnia, we were looking at my magnesium level and cortisol and melatonin profiles. And in the process of looking at doing some of this blood work, my 2 antibodies against, it's the LPS, the lipopolysaccharide, showed up. So there was some suggestions maybe I have leaky gut. And so I'm also looking at that. So with this, all the data, sort of beginning to come in, I've come up with a sort of lifestyle intervention using mainly diet, supplements, and a ancient Chinese energy, mind-body energy practice, the Qigong practice, to see if I could help improve my sleep. And as far as monitoring plan, we're going to use a lot of technology like wearable devices for sleep. And there's also a new device coming out of UCSD that monitors your gut and its sort of gut-brain activities. And I'm going to get that. And I'm going to start a food journal daily. And I'm going to get gut microbiomes every 30 days. And then do the blood biomarkers also 30 days. And then do the leaky gut test every 60 days. So hopefully I'll learn a lot more about how to improve my own health, and we'll keep you posted when I get my data. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Meg Feeny. I am a lifelong patient, a researcher, an incoming medical student, and a hopeful future doctor. My journey is sort of about how I'm going to quantify my entire medical school experience through self-tracking and employing wearables and these health measurement techniques to sort of see what med school does to me and my overall health, which to some of you that might seem a little bit scary, but I guess my entire journey with chronic illness has sort of taught me to embrace the unknown. When I was a child, I had lots of stomach aches. I was sick all the time, and that sort of sparked my diagnostic odyssey. So I saw a lot of doctors. I was told I had anxiety or it was in my head. And after a few years, I was diagnosed with celiac disease, which at the time, it was a newer disease. And as a teenager, giving up pizza sounded like the worst thing ever. But I soon learned how something as easy as a diet change improved my entire quality of life and well-being, along with many other things, for example, my asthma. And so along with that sort of began my self-investigation and allowed me to become a citizen scientist. So I had always been a runner, and after that my times improved dramatically, and I went on to run the Boston Marathon and finished in the top 50 women, only to be greeted with bombs at the end of the marathon in 2013. So that was quite the experience, and in honor of those who lost their freedom to run, I decided that I would run Boston again. And so I was on my last training run for the Boston Marathon a few years after the bombings, and little did I know that would be the last time I laced up my running shoes for 2 more years. I was crossing the street, and at a crosswalk, an SUV blew through a crosswalk at 40 miles per hour and hit me as a pedestrian. So I was stuck in the crosswalk, sustained a traumatic brain injury, collapsed lungs, and I woke up in the trauma unit where I stayed for a few weeks. And after that, I spent some time in a dark, quiet room trying to recover from a brain injury, as well as navigate the complex medical system, which sort of failed me. And so I walked the fine line of being discouraged by the current state of everything, which you guys all know, and being more inspired to pursue my journey to physicianhood. And so I recently, or I guess just prior to my accident, I had applied to medical school. And fortunately, I had gotten in. And so I was sort of on my recovery journey and had to get surgery for thoracic outlet syndrome. And thought, okay, after this surgery, I'll be feeling better. I'll start medical school and try to change the system. But I woke from surgery with an entirely paralyzed arm, as well as Horner syndrome and a few other things. I had my rib removed and my nerve was entirely avulsed. So I sort of hit rock bottom again, and now as a result I have chronic migraine, chronic neuropathic pain, complex regional pain syndrome, and a few other things listed up here. But amongst all these, they're all invisible illnesses. So as a 25-year-old, I am trying to live a normal life and trying to manage all these conditions, as well as trying to recover and regain the strength to go to medical school, and still sort of live the normal life of a 25-year-old and be with friends. And none of my friends really understand what chronic pain is, and it's something that's very hard to explain, as many of you know. So I am incredibly inspired to continue on this journey, continuing my self-monitoring, and I'm very grateful that I found this Apollo group, and I am just really determined to find ways to not only manage these diseases and survive, but learn to thrive with these and do the same for my future patients, because I've seen from the patient perspective where the gaps are in medical education, and I have to go in and teach my 9 different specialists about this rare pain disease I have. So I hope to one day be on the other side and just listen and empathize and be there for patients who are in the spot where I once was, and just make a difference in their lives. So I guess we'll open it up for...
Yeah, I mean, as you can see, this is a very small subset of some of the patients I have. And the thing I struggle with as a physician is like, what do I do with this? It's such a great and engaging group of individuals. I hate using the word, but I would be stupid not to do something with this. And that's how this kind of project was born. And, you know, I'm in kind of uncharted waters sometimes because the patients know way more about themselves. I mean, look at Dion here, was published more papers than I ever will on different things. But now it's an interesting journey because we can like co-publish things together. And that's what we're going to be doing with Gloria, who, you know, we're going to be showing dietary interventions in Qigong and how's that going to change her EEG, how's the microbiome going to shift over that, and publish papers like that. And then from educational perspective, you know, we're all in education. We've heard of the flipped classroom. So the thing I'm trying to create is like the flipped doctor visit. Just give the patient as much information as possible, let them be the guiding light, and I'm kind of the front seat driver of, you know, making sure you don't drive off into the lake or whatever, but redirecting them towards health. So very appreciative of the patients I have because I'm kind of leading from behind in this group. So I'm figuring out where that path is, and I think they all are too. And before we open up the questions, real quick, I just want to hear from you guys personally, because you've bounced around in the entire medical field through multiple specialists, and so, you know, that has negative connotations toward your health from one thing, but, you know, what does it mean from a patient perspective to take back charge of everything, like to hold the key, and you're the one that's going forward with it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll go first since I'm right next door, but you know, honestly, I think it's a mixed bag. Obviously, there's so much value in giving patients more control and charge, and I absolutely think that should happen, and particularly around data. I mean, I can't believe, as a doctor, I had to go through back channels to get my own data, and if I'm the patient, I can get access to any patient data I want as the doctor, but I can't have my own. Like, that's crazy to me. And so, yes, you know, that should certainly happen. And the reality is that the culture of medicine is still changing a lot around that. And as a patient, I got exhausted by having to be in charge. I wanted so much someone who knew more about my case than I did, or could give me something that I didn't know about, and even went so far as to actively seek like alternative and complementary modalities that I knew nothing about, so I could just lie on the table and have someone do something to me. And I think there's a big part of the therapeutic relationship that comes from not having to be the one to be totally in charge all the time, and yet having more control, or having more say, or having your own data, and being at the center of the decision-making process is critical. So it's a balance we're working on here, and I just think it always comes back to the partnership. And as long as I had a clinician who said, I have never seen the kinds of things that you're talking about here. I don't know how to get you access, but I am happy to do whatever I can to try to help, and I won't. You don't have to do this by yourself. So I, before procedures, was on the phone with pathology. I'm about to be anesthetized, and I'm telling the pathologist, please do this stain on my sample. And, my doctor then was the handoff person, but I couldn't, as the patient, I wouldn't have gotten access to that. So, I think this idea of partnership is the key, and I want to help work toward that.
I feel very blessed to have a team, that focuses on me and interested in me. And I think getting data is easy because you could run a bunch of tests. The key is, what can you turn that data into actionable information? And that's what the team is there to, help and support you. And there's also a sense of community too, because the patient that we're all very connected and bonded with one another because we have a common passion, is to take charge of our own health and get better. So I think that was one of the things I really appreciate about this project.
I think sort of being able to be in charge of my own health and learning how to run more of these N-of-1 trials is very empowering. I numerous times was sort of told time will heal in an 8-minute appointment, or given a blank prescription pad and said, what do you want? And I don't want that. I want to know how I can get better. And so learning how to take charge of my own health is very empowering, and provides me hope instead of sort of this false sense of hope that I was provided throughout my journey often.
We can open up to any questions out there, or comments, or... Is this recorded? Yes. You can come talk. Oh.
not been adopted and appreciated. So I guess my question is, how does this scale? Because honestly, it's not something that is documented or necessarily feel comfortable doing. And also, it can be pretty expensive, so I can imagine enough time that they may be cost prohibitive. It's not the kind of thing that insurance covers. I just asked a question.
Thanks for your courage in getting up and sharing. Yeah, how does this scale? It is a great question. At first, we started with 9 patients, and now we're up to 47 in our cohort, and it's growing by every conference I go to, and every time I open my mouth somewhere. And it's eventually, like I said, the people that I run circles with in technology, it'll get to the point where doctors aren't going to be. There's too much data out there to learn from a physician, and yeah, and we're at the point where we're prototyping what to do as a med student. You know, we're gonna. For Meg, when she starts her medical school career, we're going to partner her with one patient and try to learn deep dive in data longitudinal over a 4-year process. But there's still way too much information to process for some of that. And my hope is some of these Dr. Google and this artificial intelligence will get to the point where a lot of the heavy lifting is done. But it's going to take people in the design world to design an app or a way to interact all of that big data to distill it down, so your primary care physician might have a snapshot that could be looked at and played over time, kind of thing. So we're at that place. We're trying to scale this by getting more patients. You know, we're happy to talk to you afterward and see how things can go forward with this.
I do think education is such a big part, which is why we're here. And my personal opinion is that we need to start early on to teach data-driven medicine. These are foreign concepts to a lot of medical school graduates now. We just aren't teaching these kinds of things, and yet, the technologies that we've been using, they're actually not new, and they're not very expensive, and it can be scaled technologically. So the key is really the interpretation, which is definitely still an evolution, and there aren't, clean group of findings necessarily that we can say, oh, your metabolomics profile showed this, and now we know what to do. No, this is an evolving science, and it needs to be taught as such in this ongoing discussion around it. And 2, I think it's a huge opportunity for new careers, maybe medical students who don't go on to residency, they don't treat patients, but they can get skilled in data science, and then they become liaisons or places where they can interact with patients around the data and help do some of that patient-facing, as well as talk with the doctor about here's the science of the data and here's what it might mean for your patient's condition. For all different types of scenarios, we need a different workforce than we've had before with the new ways of doing medicine that we have.
So what platform are you using to gather the data, and to how are you presently?
It's Open Medicine, so we built the platform ourselves. It's been a 10-year journey that I can't take any credit whatsoever for, but it's ongoing. So we have all these different stakeholders, and it's constantly an iteration to help bring these people together. And there's a huge back-end data analytics engine that's part of it. So there's a platform that actually serves as a patient portal, as well as brings together. We have a nationwide phlebotomy network to help facilitate some of the collection with the lab network. So all of it, we have 80+ different labs and science partners that we have, and we function like a CRO also. So we execute clinical research studies.
And you have AI involvement?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk more, we'd love to. We certainly have some of that already, but open to partnership as well.
Are we okay on time? Okay.
This is very inspiring, for me personally as a stage 4 cancer survivor and gone through a lot of crazy stuff. Yeah, and I didn't have this kind of care. I wish I have. So I was curious that can you describe a little bit more what's the process of how do you find these initial patients, and how do you grow that to the 47 patients? The whole process, and what's the criteria? What do you help them? Maybe some of the key data points.
Yeah, we're brand new in this, and literally we 2 months ago is when we had our first patient group meeting, or maybe it was a little. I think Yeah, back in October, I think we had our first patient group meeting, and I think literally the next morning, the abstract was due for this conference, and so we threw it together, and like here we are. So we're just in like the whole startup mode. We've founded a nonprofit organization called Precision Healthcare Ecosystem, which Project Apollo is like the first big project that's coming out of this, and we just got our bank account last week, so it's like we're just literally just brand new starting. The entry point for me as a physician is patients, and you talked about the platform. Patients are either bringing me 400 pages of their data that they've been collecting on themselves, or they're emailing me Excel spreadsheets. They're giving me their Fitbit data, and I'm trying to say, what do I do with this? How do I collate it? I'm just going to ship it all to Open Medicine Institute and start displaying it, and from a data visualization point, looking at it differently. So, in the entry point, I try to meet the patient where they're at. Some patients have a lot of resources and they're very motivated, and they're going to, like Larry Smarr is getting his microbiome and the genomic sequence of every bacteria on a daily basis. I don't know if many people want to do that, but meet the patient where they're at. I have another patient and he only is tracking his steps. And that's a precision medicine initiative of tracking your steps, and what are the health outcomes that we can look at that for different things. So I'm trying to learn where that scale is for each patient.
And at Open Medicine, we have an undiagnosed diseases program and a precision medicine program. So we don't claim to know how to do this, already. We're learning about what works, and this project is an example of that. And it's going to be different in different contexts. Sometimes you have a child, for example, who clearly has a genetic driver, and yet in my case, while I did whole genome sequencing because I was just desperate to get any information I could, there has been nothing really obvious that's fallen out of that to say, here's what could be responsible for a big part, and then beyond that, how do we treat you more successfully, right? Because that's really the goal here. Is we need to demonstrate that this high resolution medicine is improving the lives of the patients, and in our case, we're particularly interested in the relationship. What does it do to use the data as the centerpiece for the dialogue between the doctor and the patient, who are both learning together about the data? It's not the doctor saying, I know what to do with the data, here's what you do. It's them, using it to get on the same page and invite that deeper discussion with the patient. Well, what do you want for your life, particularly if you have these conditions? And sometimes there isn't a cure for the disease, but how can we use what we're learning through the data and repeated measurement to give you a better quality of life?
Yeah, so that brings us some questions. So is it currently, there's no geolocation restriction? Anybody can join from anywhere? Or how does it work?
Yeah,
we're looking at that, of how to do this more virtually, in the virtual sense. Right now, most of my patients are in the San Diego region. People that aren't, they're kind of flying in and maybe getting a few tests done here and there. But I'm looking at ways, we just talked about this yesterday and the day before, about being able to see patients and collect the data from different areas, even though that you don't have to be present for that.
We're putting together a framework really that anybody could use, and the patients in each of the cases will kind of act as mentors, I think, for how to guide other patients that may want to do this with a clinician that is close to them, or any kind of provider that they trust, and use Open Medicine maybe for some aspects. If there's certain technologies they want access to, then Open Medicine is a platform that once you come, you can be anywhere, international even. So there's all sorts of ways to make it work, and we're hopefully gonna, put it out just as a model for people who want to do N of 1 type things on themselves, clinicians, patients, anybody who wants to apply these types of principles.
So that also brings up two questions. Is that one is, a lot of these genome sequencing, they're very expensive. So, do you guys have some sort of partnership or able to build insurance systems?
We're looking at trying to find what we can work with for your insurance system, of how much we can squeeze out of the insurance companies that we're doing at this. I'm sure they're going to come slap my wrist if I'm getting the CRP on a weekly basis on patients. But we are partnering with some other startups, especially in the San Diego region, because it's a big biotech area, of seeing how low we can drop the price point on some of these tests and such. So.
And then how do you access this data? Because some of this current EHR system does not even talk to each other.
Yeah, well, not to be an advertisement for our platform, but we couldn't do it without it, frankly. It's, it's a place where we gather all of the different types of data, and the patient is in control of that, and you can choose as the patient who you want to share it with, and if not, then you get to do that too. But it requires an integrative system, and because there wasn't and still is yet one to be really, besides a patient-controlled patient record, but still it has to be interoperable. Then that's what we do on the platform and how we make it most useful.
Thank you.
I was also going to add in response to your question as well. When we're talking about data, for me, I've had extreme medical costs, like many of you and many of the people in our group, and I'm a student, and so I haven't actually had a ton of these tests yet. A lot of what I do is more of qualitative data, so data in general drives discovery. I track things sometimes like yoga or diet or going for a run or whatever you can. It doesn't always necessarily have to be these tests, although that's what a lot of our group members are doing. It, I guess, can be other things as well.
It's one of the main missions of when we started the nonprofit is to create a fundraising platform for patients that aren't able to afford it. And like I said, the technology is driving the price down. I mean, 10 years ago, sequencing your genome was $10 million, literally. And 5 years before that, it was $100 million. Now you can get it for $900, and in 5 years, it might be $9. So in 5 years, every primary care physician is going to have a patient whose the genome's sequenced, and again, the tidal wave of data is coming. So I know you had a question you wanted to.
Thanks. So the data problem is one that I think technology can solve. With enough time and enough money, you can solve that. And so ostensibly, you could have a perfect data file of all of the information. My question becomes, so what? Because you still need to then get it out to clinicians, potentially in very specialized areas, who are not all located in the same location, who may not have bought into this. What have you figured out about how to connect folks who may be specialists in rare diseases or other kinds of areas, so they're not just looking at point solutions, but they're also thinking, assuming I had the data, now I know how to analyze it in this more integrated way, rather than I just want to see the part that's interesting to me?
No, good question. I think, again, we collect all of this data, and then it's so what? What do you do with this? And if it can create an action plan, then that's a good thing. But if you collect all of this data for the sake of collecting data, we're in the field right now of how much data is too much? We don't know yet. And so that's the play on this Apollo thing is this is a set of astronauts, and taking the first step on the moon, no one knew what was going to happen. And you might sink into the moon or bounce off, who knows? But someone had to have the courage to do that. And then once enough iterations get out there, going with that. And we are currently trying to, put the word out of who are the research labs, who are the clinicians, who are the people that are kind of pushing the envelope and forward thinking in this, and connecting those people with some of the people in our patient cohort and moving forward from that way. And hopefully that could be a prototype moving forward with it.
We have a real...
I think education is the key. I think what we learn, in addition to publishing it, I think we want to make it easily understandable. We have connected with people that are in the documentary production, film documentaries and things like that, where we could get it out to the public as well as the clinicians. If you just educate the clinicians and the patient doesn't know, there's no connection. You need to come from all of these. And how do you do it is a big job. But I think we plan to really use that information to really be able to reach the public, the consumer, as well as the providers. So this is going to be a long journey, but as if we're starting.
You brought up a good point, and I want to address the technology aspect, because there's data all over the place in everything that we do, and it's new to medicine. but my wife is in advertising, and she's like, oh, we've already done all of this. I mean, you don't think, like, as far as looking at behavioral change, if I'm going to track data to make a behavioral change in something, you don't think Amazon knows what my behavior is on the weekend, or what Target knows what like where I spend my time? You know, they've already figured that out as far as bringing things to the consumer. Or, you know, another good analogy is we use with cars is like you take your car to the mechanic, it plugs into a computer. That computer analyzes everything that happened to that car over the last, you know, 6 months between the last time. Not only that, let's say you have like a Honda Civic, it compares that data to every Honda Civic that's ever been made in the database. You know, and why isn't that being done with people? You know, why can't we get that? The technology is already there, it's just not being used in the right way. And so transparency is another big thing about this, is like, and who owns the data is another large topic we could talk about forever, but I don't.
We see it really as a community. I mean, that's also our value system at OMI, is that we must have this networking feature, and having the patient, you know, really at the center of that around the data, and they get to decide who it goes to, and sometimes carry it to the specialist if that's what's needed, or teach the researcher. I love this model with the sciences. Each stakeholder connecting to one another in new ways, or bringing them all together around the table to learn from one another about, you know, the patient can absolutely teach the researcher how to look at their own science differently oftentimes. So, you know, building that interconnectivity, I think, is the goal.
I have your cohort is exceptionally bright, and I have a question about how you scale this to people that don't maybe have the same socioeconomic backgrounds and ability to be able to even cognitively process everything that's happening to them. You know, my daughter has congenital heart disease, and for her first 6 months, she underwent a bunch of interventions that were all unnecessary because she was misdiagnosed. And so finally, when she was diagnosed with Noonan syndrome, we could. And so I was at the hospital advocating for her around the clock. I would have same parents on the floor with, you know, 6 children and a daughter going through a heart transplant, and I'm reading to her 3-year-old at night, right? You know, so I thought it's easy for me to advocate for but what about all these other poor families that aren't pushing back on the things that aren't happening correctly or should be happening correctly? And so I just, as I look at your brilliant cohort, I wonder, have you thought about how do you extend it to sort of less advantaged? I don't know if that's the right.
Yes.
I do all the time, because I got dismissed in the same way that other patients do, and it never left my forefront about, oh my gosh, if this is the way that I am treated, how in the world are people without this background going to get what they need? So I don't want to jump on you, but you know, I have been so humbled in my own journey. I always felt very compassionate, but what I have learned in this, from this view, is the most valuable experience I've had in my medical training. And my hope, anyway, is that there can be this mentorship happening. These, like you noted, you know, and I too, I'm not an average patient by any stretch, and yet I had so much trouble advocating for myself. But I can teach some people some basic things, even if it's just basic data science or basic ways now to talk to your doctor that I learned many years in, like, oh, I guess I shouldn't be very emotional when I'm talking about my pain. That actually makes a big difference. And so, you know, these guys have become experts in ways of navigating the system, and now they have data. You know, they can really do a lot to teach other patients how to get what they need.
Yeah, so we're looking at that in the group, and especially I'm trying to pair patients that have the same diagnosis together. So a patient came in and maybe has a lot of resources and did all this testing around her Lyme disease, and then a new patient comes to me with Lyme disease that might not have enough resources, and I'm like, all right, here's a mentor-mentee type level. And looking to scale this beyond, it is something that I struggle with, because, you know, I end up with some fabulous patients, and then, you know, who really needs it the most? And it's the same world as I live in integrative medicine. It's like everyone can afford acupuncture, but who's the people that need this the most? So how do you scale this down? And we're looking at going in the, working with UCSD's Department of Computer Science and the design lab there, of creating things that could be educational platforms of teaching people. So one of the patients who's a cohort of this is getting his PhD, and his whole thing is on citizen science. And so he's creating this online platform of trying to teach people to become better scientists and scientific thinking from a very basic level. But it is a great question, and it's definitely a tension that's in my mind all days.
I just had a question about your attitude and your the philosophy that you have to sort of maintain if you're tracking your disease or the symptoms associated with your illness daily on a disciplined, very regimented basis, and how that affects the other parts of your personal life. I commend you guys a lot. I think this is commendable. This takes a lot of work, and you're potentially doing this for a lot of other people that may not necessarily even be able to represent themselves in a data form. At the same time, though, this could, thinking about these things on a regular basis can have some potential downsides. I mean, just thinking about that. So I just wanted you guys to talk about that as much as you care to speak on it, but potentially the intention is to share it with people who may consider doing this, but need to know the everything about tracking in this way.
I haven't started to, I'm still in the process of collecting my baseline data, but, some days, if you're traveling in particular, you may miss, your collection point, depending on, I think you have a choice to make whatever frequency you want to track and what you want to track. And if you miss 1 or 2 points, it's probably okay, but if you miss it for a long period of time, it's probably not very meaningful. So it's really your sense of commitment to this process. You're in control of that, and nobody can make you do it. I mean, so I guess it's your self-motivation and your desire for self-care and how much you care to, use that to help you gain insights and get to a better state of health.
I think that taking charge of my own health sort of changed my mood for the better and my overall attitude toward my pain and chronic illness, in the form of allowing me to accept that I probably will have some of these pains, and I know that I will have these illnesses that are chronic forever, despite some of the doctors that said time will heal and such. And not really accepting in the form of surrendering, but more of taking like an active stance. And again, back to the whole empowerment theme of feeling like I'm not on their side of being the physician yet, but that I don't have to spend my entire life attending doctor's appointments, and that I can do something to make me feel better and live a normal life. So I think that it's sort of, I know what you mean, that it could sort of have a downside in terms of like you're always thinking about it, and like you're always just like you don't want to be defined by chronic illness and such. But I think for me it almost had and has a more positive impact.
I mean, there's a lot of good data around I don't know a lot in the scheme of things, but some good data around the process of tracking itself is helpful because of the kind of witness aspect of it, that the person can see themselves. There's a reflective quality similar to narrative medicine, and getting, you see your own story reflected in some ways, and that is very positively reinforcing. Of course, as a person who loves science and discovery, like knowing that I can see something from that is, of course, also motivating. But admittedly, like I need to take a break sometimes. I just don't want to do it. I want to just like live my life, and I've had enough of an experience with being compromised and debilitated now that each moment is like as precious as ever. And do I want to be filling out my thing or whatever? Sometimes no. I just want to go for a day at the beach and not think about anything else. So patients are going to have different thresholds for that, and it's always critical to be mindful of that. And I think the data for wearables now show it's about a 3-month, kind of a standard wearable device. People are like all into it for 3 months and then they just abandon it. And so we should take that data seriously and figure out, what do we really need to collect? I think that's part of the issue here is we have to, or we feel like we need to do a lot more now because we don't know what are the more the data points that we need the most, and where do we need to be more insistent. Like, I know it sucks, but just stick through it, and we're going to learn a lot from this. We'll get wiser about where we need to be more focused and where we can say, don't worry about that so much.
And I'm trying to keep a track on my patient group too, because I don't want to end up being the stress that's causing their disease. It's like, hey, the data's going like this. It's because Dr. Carisi keeps giving me more projects in this, what I'm doing. It's like, hey, let's write a grant together. We're good. You're like, no, I'm not feeling great today, Dr. Carisi. I'm like, oh yeah, okay. Because again, there's such great patients that I have. Sometimes it's hard to, and that's why I love what Meg, this slide that you have of invisible illness, because it's, sometimes I forget on the level that you guys are acting on, so.